So now we're going to learn about optionals and how to convert strings to integers. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create a string here. We're going to say var number string, and we're going to set this equal to a string, but we're just going to put the value 9 inside of it. Now we can convert this to an integer by saying var number string to int, and we're going to say this is going to be equal to number string dot to int. And actually, let's go ahead and just slowly type this. We see that we have this question mark here, and we see this kind of weird syntax. Now, we haven't covered functions yet, and we will absolutely cover functions in the future, but this is another function that we're seeing here. We saw a function when we were messing around in our first project, our postcard app, and we used the function resign first responder, which we called on our text field in order to make the keyboard go away. So just remember, a function is a bit of code or something that will happen by calling this function. And we don't have to write out all these different steps. All we have to do is call the name, and we're able to get this to work. So when we see these parentheses here like this, it means that we're calling a function. Now this function doesn't have any parameters. It's just empty, but sometimes we'll have to put some information in between these parentheses in the future. Now, we use this dot notation to call this function, and this will convert our string to an int optional. Now, an optional sounds super confusing. If you're coming from Objective-C, you've never seen an optional before. But there are this really cool new type that's introduced in Swift, and it's going to prevent you from having a lot of problems. Basically, what happens here is if we enter gibberish into number string, let's say we added some characters and then we added another number here, this would be nil, and we actually see that it prints out nil to this right side panel here, and this is not a valid number. We can't convert this into an integer, right? This is not a valid integer. But if we just put 9 in here, we see that sum 9, right? And it says sum 9 because this is an optional right now. So it does have a value, and basically an optional can have two different values. It can have an actual value, right? In this case, we want it to have an integer value, or it can be nil. And nil basically means it was not able to get a value back. So later on, we're going to see we can do some control flow. We could write, if, this is valid or if this does not equal nil. There's a bunch of different control flow we can do for optionals. But in our case, we're just going to make sure that we're going to put number string in here. And we're going to get this optional back. Remember that optionals can have two values. It could be nil, as in this was not valid, or it can actually pass us back some value here. And then we're going to learn how to do what's called unwrapping an optional. And unwrapping an optional just means that if there is a valid value, let's go ahead and grab that, and we're just going to set that equal to a variable for now. So we're going to say optional to int, and we're going to set this equal to number string to int, and then we're going to add an exclamation point at the end. Now the exclamation point says, okay, convert my optional into the actual value. And in this case, it gives us 9. So once again, if we put some gibberish in here, we're going to see it gives us an error here because we cannot unwrap an invalid value here. This is nil. We can't unwrap nil. So when unwrapping, we need to make sure that we're unwrapping some actual value. And if you get some sort of crash like that, actually, let's just go ahead and add that back. We're going to see this is our error here that we're going to get. If you see an error like this, it often has to do with your optional issue here when we have an exec bad access error. So let's go ahead and remove that once more. And then we can see that this is a regular integer now. We can even update it, so we can say optional to int. And we can say this is going to be equal to optional to int plus 3. And that will equal 12 now. So we're able to use this integer exactly the same way we've used integers in the past. And we've now figured out how we can go from strings to integers. And in our previous one, we figured out how we could add an integer to a string. So we figured out how to do conversions both ways.